Hello, welcome everyone to the Boston.com monthly book club. My name is Catherine Nazaro, and I'm the manager of Porter Square Books Boston edition located in the Seaport. We're here today to talk about Slip by Marika McCoola and Atmaja Pandya. And we're here with Marika to talk about it. Marika is a local author and illustrator and a former Porter Square Books manager as well. This is her second graphic novel. Welcome, Marika.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Thank you for joining me. So we will be having our conversation. The chat is not enabled for this, but you can drop questions in the Q&A. Feel free to do so and I will read them out. Marika, do you want to start by telling us about this new book?
Sure. So this is my young adult debut, which I actually started writing 9 years ago. It's only now coming out. And I started it, I just gotten out of a relationship that was really emotionally dynamic. And I was finding that a lot of my relationships, romantic, friendships, all different sorts of relationships were morphing and changing. And I found that the young adult books that I was reading wasn't quite reflecting that. It was really framing a lot of relationships as the be all and end all, like this is the relationship that will last you forever and it will never change. And I was finding that as we grow and change as people, so too do our relationships. And I wanted to write a book about that. And one of the ways I was processing all of the emotions I was feeling was I wanted to work in clay to feel that. And I wasn't able to do that. So the next best thing was to write about it. And so this book is loosely based on a month that I spent between my junior and senior year of undergrad, living in a 52 Ford Falcon van on a farm, an art farm on the border of Vermont and New York, and making ceramics in a barn. I built a kiln, I made a bunch of weird creatures, and I spent my days in a flow state really thinking about things. And so that was the origin of this book.
That's fantastic. So art is a big theme in this novel, obviously. What's it, you have done a few graphic novels now, this is your second. When doing a graphic novel, what part of the storytelling is art and what part is like more narrative focused? How do you balance that?
That's interesting. So I do write things other than graphic novels. I just have only published graphic novels. And so for me, the distinction is for a graphic novel, there has to be something visually compelling. There has to be something that we have to see in order for it to really resonate. And so for me, a graphic novel appears to me almost like a movie in my head, and I'm zooming in and zooming out and freezing the frame, and each frame is a panel. And so when I see it that way, I know that it has to be a graphic novel. And because this is very personal and there's a lot of internal struggle going on, that needed to be shown rather than told. And so visuals were the way to do that. It's also about an art making practice. And so it really needed to show that in the illustrations. And so there's actually a lot of technical pieces where I go over different skills that you use when doing ceramics, different tools that you use, that's all mixed into the book. And it was very key because part of how Jade, our main character, expresses herself is through that artwork. And so that to me needed to be visually seen. In terms of what is a visual and what is text, I never want there to be repetition. So in writing a graphic novel script, you're describing every single panel and every single page turn and also listing the dialogue. And so I'm very careful about cutting any dialogue I don't think is needed. And like, I'm always willing to cut more dialogue once the illustrations have been done by the illustrator. In this case, we maybe cut 2 words, but otherwise it was already pretty tight because I am such a visual person. So I do see it in my head and understand what needs to be the visual and the illustration and what just needs to be the text.
That's so cool. That's such an interesting process. You also mention your illustrator, your co-writer. What was it like working with them? What was that collaboration process like?
So it was actually very hands-off. So because I write such a tight script that describes every single panel and every single page turn, there wasn't much involvement. And part of that was also respect. So basically, once my script had been edited and I'd worked on it with my editor, who Elise Howard at Algonquin. She asked me for a list of illustrators, like 4 or 5 illustrators who I could see illustrating the book. And she also came up with a list. Atmaja happened to be on both of them and was available. And Atmaja and I were friends prior to working on Slip. We were introduced by Molly Ostertag, who wrote Witch Boy. And so we were friends with each other. And I basically told Atmaja when the manuscript was handed over, like, I trust you to do your job. You are an illustrator. You are trained to do this. Everything that needs to be there is in the script. And I don't want this process. Like, I don't want to be hands-on with this and get in your way. I want you to really put your mark on this book. And so I'm not going to ever text you or talk to you about the book while you're working on it. Like, I'll text you about other things because we're friends, but if you have any questions about the book, you have to facilitate that and reach out, or you have to go through the editor to ask those questions, because I really want you to feel ownership over this manuscript. And ultimately, we ended up talking twice. Once was she asked me for a map of what the art farm work looked like, which I, of course, had already drawn while I was writing it. So I sent that over. And the second time was when they asked us what we wanted the colors to be. So the interior of the book is 2-tone and Pantone colors. So there's this raspberry color, which we call raspberry sunset. And there's blueberry color, which we call blueberry midnight, because they're nice ice cream flavors. And initially when we were asked that, we were like, oh my gosh, it has to be terracotta because she's working with terracotta clay. That'll be the perfect color. And then we went to the publisher and they're like, you can't do that. It looks like poop. It looks terrible. And so they suggested the blue, and then Atmaja picked the pink to go along with it for those really like flashy, punchy moments. And so that's how we arrived at those.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because that was one of like my favorite things about the graphic novel, was the fact that you have almost all of it in, I'm trying to like find a good page for it now. You have almost all of it in that blue, and then there's just the certain moments that you have that bright pink color. And it's such a, yeah. It's such a good like moment for it. Which answers one of my questions. Since we're talking about illustrator work and stuff like that, though, we did have a question that was sent in to us from the audience, which is, do you have any advice for a 10-year-old aspiring illustrator, for other people who might want to do something like this?
Oh yeah, just make a lot of work, like do a lot of things, ask a lot of questions. Illustrators are really approachable. And we also love talking to young people who are learning and refining their craft. And so if you go to a comics convention, for example, if you go to the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo or MICE, like bring some of your comics with you and go up to authors and illustrators who you like and show it to them. Like, we are always so excited to see the work of students and really excited to talk about it with you, to ask questions. If you want to learn about a certain technique, we'll generally tell you about it. And so just make a lot of work, and also reach out to people, because most people who become illustrators, and that includes myself, we got where we are because other people who were working illustrators gave us time, gave us techniques, and we're really generous. And so we really like to give that back and pay that forward. And so go ahead and like ask questions, and then don't be scared to show your work to people. Like, there will always be people for whom your work isn't great. Like, they don't like it for whatever reason. And that doesn't mean it's bad, but pay attention to the people who give you a constructive critique and give you notes on like, this is what you're really doing well, and this is how you can make it even better. And find those people and seek out those people who can really help you move forward. And don't get caught up on, especially people on the internet telling you that it's not good, because like, I know that my book is not for everybody, and that's okay. It just has to be found by the people it is for. And that's the true of your art as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope that is helpful. Personally, I will not be using that because I will never be an artist. But talking about that, though, it must take, like you said, a lot of trust to be able to hand off a story to somebody else and have them help bring it to life. Were there any moments in the book that you like were just, what was your favorite when you got back, that you like were blown away by seeing it brought into art?
Oh, so there's the climactic scene, which I'm not going to like reveal in case there are people on this call who haven't read it, but there's this intense scene that is the climax. And when I saw how Atmaja had drawn that, I was like, that is exactly how it was in my head. Like that, you just nailed it perfectly. And that really did it for me. And then I was really surprised and delighted by what she had done with the romantic portions.
Mhm.
I think I was really focused on sort of the drama and the internal dialogue that was happening in the book. And Atmaja's cute style really brought out the romantic qualities of the book and like the meet cute. And so that to me was a surprise and I really loved because I think like she was able to heighten that in my text in a way that like I wouldn't have been able to do as an illustrator. And so that was just an utter delight. And then honestly, the cover is like, I really love what she was able to do with the cover because you have this indication of like all the clay tools, you have this foreshadowing happen, the movement, the trees, like I think she just really nailed it.
Looking at the cover before I read it, I was like, oh, that's like a really nice cover. And then going back at the end, yeah, you really do get all of those different aspects of everything that you weren't expecting to see. So speaking of the cover, actually, like you've mentioned several times, there is a lot of ceramic work in and clay and stuff in this book. Tell me about the title. How did you know immediately that was what you wanted to call it? Or
Absolutely not. In fact, I only changed the folder on my computer to Slip like 3 days ago because I kept looking for things and couldn't find them. This was just called Art Farm on my computer for the longest time. Like that was the living document. We sold it knowing that was not going to be the title, but it was just the working title. And then we got to the point where like the book needed a title and we did not have a title. I was trying to come up with a bunch of different things. Nothing was sticking. And then the assistant editor on the book was like, okay, how about Slip? And I was like, yes, absolutely. That makes total sense. Because for those of you who don't know ceramics, Slip is clay mixed with water. And it creates a sort of goopy substance that you use to like seal two pieces of clay together. You can also, if it's a different color, you can brush it on the outside of something and then let it dry and then carve through to reveal things. But it also refers to like, it could be about slipping, like slipping into madness, slipping into your emotions. And so I liked that it could play on all of these different aspects that were apparent in the book. And I was really glad that she came up with it, but I did not come up with that. I'm just like so grateful to that assistant editor.
it was not an immediate thing.
No.
Well, you do talk about different, like you said, different techniques throughout the book. And there is throughout the book this like dichotomy of like how control works with art and how unpredictability works with art, and like that in combination with Jade's emotions throughout it all. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but it is something that I really admired about the book. So
Thank you. Yeah, I received the comment a lot that it is about finding yourself through art and what that looks like. And that's a lifelong process. Like you never reach some conclusion of this is how I express myself through art. It's always changing. And for me, when I work with ceramics, part of the fun is that there is that unknown quality. Like there is that part you have to let go where every time you put something in a kiln and fire it, it might never come out. Like it might come out as shards. It might be a total disaster. And you just have to accept that. And so accepting that loss is at the very heart of making ceramics, which is also at the very heart of this book, of accepting the fact that like every relationship that you enter into, like you could lose it. Like that could happen. Like no matter how much you invest in it, that relationship could be lost, but you're doing it because in that moment, it is wonderful and good. And you want to try to build it as much as you can and give it the chance it has to succeed. And the same is true of the artwork that you create. Like you want to give it what you have and give it your all in the hopes that it succeeds. And if it does, that's wonderful. And if not, the process was still worth it. And so there's also this sense of like with ceramics, like the glazing, you can try so many tests and try to get it to work, but there's always, again, going to be that unpredictability because you have to dial in all of these different aspects of the kiln, which if you're into chemistry, like ceramics is really fun. You can go do a deep dive into that. And it's that unpredictability that's like really interesting, and you kind of have to let go and embrace. And part of what Jade has to do over the course of this book is let go and embrace unpredictability. And so that's facilitated by the medium that she's working in. She's trying to do that with both the medium and with her emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that came across very well in the book. And it's one of the things I really like about it. In that, I am going to take a second and say, just a reminder, using the Q&A button down at the bottom, you can feel free to submit your own questions. I do have more, so I can just keep so in part of that, you have all of this stuff. I want to know about the wood kiln, because that's a major plot point in this. It's a reward for Jade is putting art into this wood kiln, which I thought was very cool. But as somebody who's never done ceramics, I don't know anything about. And so I was wondering if you could talk about wood kilns at all.
Sure. So part of the fun thing about a wood kiln, and you can kind of see what a wood kiln looks like here. Part of the fun of a wood kiln is it's the ash itself that is hitting the clay and reacting. And that's what's causing like the finish on the pot. And part of what causes different finishes is how oxygen moves through the kiln. So again, you can get really nerdy and into the chemistry of this. And part of it is also the flame. So if you take a ceramic piece and you put it in a wood kiln and there's a smaller piece in front of it, the piece in front of it is actually going to affect how the flame and the oxygen and even the like ash that's hitting the ceramic and fluxing, or like basically becoming a liquid and like going around the thing to express itself. And so you're going to get a total surprise in terms of what it looks like when you come out. And there are people who like have their own wood kilns and have ideas about how you can place things to get certain effects, and they've worked their entire lives on figuring out what that is. But for the most part, if your work is just going in a wood kiln, you just don't know what's going to happen. And that's part of the excitement behind it. And there are a number of different finishes you can do in ceramics, and some of them are mentioned in here, like raku. And they're just different firing processes that generally have unpredictability and just get these really beautiful, surprising results. So it's also kind of fun because you don't have to really decide. You don't have to say, well, this piece is going to be blue and this piece, like this bit is going to be white and I'm going to have this here. You can say, I like the general feel of this. I like, the matte versus the gloss or the semi-gloss, and I'm just going to see what happens and trust that process. So again, that unpredictability that comes in. And so you make the piece with that in mind. And I was lucky enough, I fired the wood kiln that I built. And then I also, the place where I did my residency, Salem Artworks, later built an actual wood kiln after I had been there and built my own. And so I've had work fired in there since. And some of that's on my website, so you can actually see what some of the effects are. And if you Google it too, you'll just go down in a deep dive of what wood kiln finishes look like.
That is so cool. I will definitely have to be looking into this after. So you said that this book took 9 years to write. Obviously.
Well, it wasn't 9 years to write. It took me 2 years to write.
Okay.
The edits, but it took 9 years to like become what it is today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously graphic novels and like the YA graphic novel landscape has changed a lot over the past, decade and even past few years. Are there other books that you would like? What was your inspiration for this besides like your own life? Were there other books that you were inspired by or that you drew from or that you thought this book would be in conversation with?
Yeah, there were at the time. I actually just like put together, it actually appeared today on Algonquin's on Algonquin's Instagram, and you can kind of click through and see a bunch of different books. But at the time there were a couple that existed that it was sort of in dialogue with. And I can even pull those up for you. But it was really tricky because I actually had to go back through all of the books I was reading. I was Googling myself to figure out what I was reading at the time. Because I didn't remember because it was so long ago. But one of them was I'll Give You the Sun, which explores what it means to be true to yourself and involves artists. Another was The Truth Commission by Susan Juby, which is about a school that is, they call the farm, and it is a school for young artists and sort of all of the shenanigans that happen there. There's also Chasing Shadows, which is a hybrid novel that involves sections in prose and sections in comics and explores mental illness and friendship, which was really important. And then at the time I was also reading Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant, which had just come out when I started writing, by Roz Chast, which is a memoir about her relationship with her parents as they aged. And it combines humor and tragedy in a really interesting way. And so I had all of those in my brain while I was working on different stages of the process, whether that was writing or revising. And then since then, now I kind of see it in conversation with Heartstopper or Laura Jean Keats Breaking Up With Me or Bloom, because those I think are more recent things that have come out that really speak to some of those themes.
Yeah, definitely. This is very much a book about grief and about like dealing with that as well. I don't want to say too much on it because obviously dealing with that is the whole course of the book, so I don't want to spoil the ending. But do you want to speak about that at all?
Sure. So that was actually one of the things that resonated with both me and Atmaja, is that while we were working on the book, we both of us, like at the different periods in which we were working on it, we were both going through grieving processes. So when I was writing it, I was going through a grieving process. And it's one of the reasons why I didn't want to illustrate this book, is that the 2 years it took to write it were really hard. Like, it was an emotionally difficult book to write. And I finished writing it and I was like, all right, I don't have the emotional energy to draw it for 3 years. Like, that, to live with that is going to be too much. And I also feel like I've done the work and sort of gotten through this project and I'm happy with it. And I'm excited to see what someone else does. And then it just happened to coincide that while Atmaja was working on the book, she also was going through some grieving processes. And so for her, again, she found a lot of resonance in that book. And I think it just, again, speaks to the way that art can help you be a processing mechanism. So just as Jade in the book is using art to deal with grief, like, so too is this a product, an artistic product of grief.
Thank you. Yes, I think that definitely comes through in the book. And like I said, I don't want to spoil too much about it. But so once again, put out the call for people to have their own questions. But in lieu of that, you've talked about, this book, you've talked about other books that it's in conversation with. We started this a little bit before the call, but tell me about books you're reading right now. Tell me about what's next for you.
Sure. So I am currently reading, or I've just finished, Powder Days by Heather Hansman, which is about the future of snow and sort of the issues with the ski industry as a whole from a number of different factors, including economic, in terms of inclusion. Really interesting, really great to read when it's 100 degrees. And then I just finished reading Wash Day Diaries, which I really loved, which is a beautiful collaboration of a graphic novel that I highly recommend. And on graphic novels as well, Across a Field of Starlight, which also there's a couple scenes in here that talk about art and its purpose in life that really resonated with me. And then I recently finished, and I cannot stop talking about it enough, Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, which I'm just head over heels in love with. And so I kind of have to throw it in there. And it's just like so poignant and perfect for the moment we are in this country right now, which is why it really resonated. And then in terms of sort of like next projects, I've come out of what I would call a wintering period. I don't know if anybody knows Wintering by Catherine May, but she talks about creative cycles where you sort of have to feed yourself before you start working again. And I've come out of a wintering cycle where I've been focusing on like my climbing techniques and like my outdoor skills, and I'm now ready to actually start writing again. And so I actually just started loosely putting together ideas for a project, and I'm actually looking for recommendations. So I thought I would just throw that out there. But I'm interested in either visual hybrid books or comics that focus on the outdoors and people's experience of the outdoors. So you could think about like the new Alison Bechdel or Americana, which is about hiking the PCT, or You and a Bike in a Road by Eleanor Davis. And I'm especially interested in books that are not from the United States. And it's fine if they haven't been translated, but I'm interested to see like what the intersection of text and images for books about the outdoors.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody has any recommendations of those, you can also drop them into the question and answer section. I don't know if I do, but I would definitely be interested in seeing them if you find some, because that sounds incredibly interesting. Books about the outdoors and like travel stuff is always a place where I find things so interesting, and then I like feel like I stumble upon them once in a blue moon where I'm like, oh my God, yeah, this is so good. The last one I read came out in 2020, I think, which is called Museum, the Museum of Whales I'll Never See, or something like that, which is about a bunch of museums in Iceland. And apparently Iceland has some of the most museums per capita of any country. And some of them are just, these are all just like really weird museums. There's like a necromancy museum. There's a museum just of rocks, where like people would just turn anything into a museum. A lot of them are really small. And this goes into a few specific ones, and it's always incredibly interesting and deals with the history of them and everything like that. So I think, unless anybody else has any questions, is there anything else you want to talk about with the book? I think you have answered all of my questions, all the questions I can say without spoiling anything.
Right. So there's one little thing that I like to point out, because a lot of people like to ask, if there's anything that changed in the book, or like ask about the writing process. And my favorite scene in the book takes place in a hardware store. I don't know about everybody else, but I always like to take the little sheets of paint chips because they're beautiful. They make good bookmarks, and the paint chip names are hysterical. And so I had originally in my first draft written in a scene where the protagonist or her love interest are in a hardware store looking at things. And it got cut out before it went to be queried. And we hit almost the last draft with my editor, and she was like, so we need one more scene that's cute and romantic and kind of fun. And I was like, oh, I have it. So it's really hard. Writers often talk about like killing their darlings or like cutting out the best bits. And the way I get around that is I keep a separate document that everything I cut goes into. So it's not lost. It's just on my hard drive. And so I was able to just pull this scene fully formed, plop it into the book. And it is there to this day. And so everywhere that I sign books, I put a paint chip card into the book. So if you go to Porter Square where I have signed books, you will find a little paint chip card into the book.
That does explain why I was looking at one of the books in the store the other day, and I was like, who left a paint chip card in this? Okay. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. Kill your darlings, but bury them very shallowly.
Yeah. Because they might come back and have a resurrection. Yeah.
Exactly. Fantastic. I love that. That's so cute. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, in that case, I guess the next thing I will say is that the next Boston.com book club is going to be Dirtbag, Massachusetts by Isaac Fitzgerald. And that's going to be on August 22nd. So I think that's all I have today.
Thank you so much for doing the interview, Catherine. This was great.
Yeah, thank you. It's been, I mean, like I said in your introduction, you are a former Porter Square Books employee as well. And so it's been nice to catch up with you in this way, in this very public forum.